Isabella's hands shook as she tried to button up her blouse. Her heart was pounding fast, and at 17, everything seemed so big and scary. The light coming through the lace curtains did nothing to make her feel better. She moved quickly, trying to get ready before anyone could hear her. Sweat ran down her face, and she wiped it away. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't recognize the person staring back at her. Her eyes were wide, and her mouth was open as she tried to catch her breath. It had been 4 months, and she only found out yesterday. The secret she was hiding felt heavy, like a big weight on her chest. She couldn't imagine what would happen if her parents found out. Her father's angry words rang in her head. "You have embarrassed us." She pressed her hand to her stomach, feeling nervous and scared. A knock on her door made her jump. Her mom's voice called out, "Isabella, are you in there?" "Yes, Mom," she said, trying to sound strong. She knew her mom's sharp eyes would look for anything wrong. "Dinner in 10 minutes, her mom said before walking away, the sound of her heels clicking on the floor. Once it was quiet again, Isabella grabbed the phone she had hidden under the floorboard. Her hands were shaking as she dialed Leon's number. After a few rings, his tired voice answered, "Isabella." "Leon," she whispered, "we need to meet now." There was a long pause before he said, "Is it serious?" "Yes," she replied. "Meet me at the park by the old swing set in 15 minutes. The sun was setting when Isabella arrived at the park, the sky turning purple. Leon was already there, standing tall with his hands in his pockets. When he saw her, his eyes filled with worry. "What's wrong?" he asked. "I'm pregnant," Isabella said, her voice shaking. She looked around, afraid her father might appear. "If they find out, they'll kill me." Leon looked away, his jaw tight. "How long?" he asked. "For months," she whispered. "I didn't know until yesterday." She couldn't finish the sentence. "If they find out, they'll... She couldn't say it. Her breath came in short gasps. Leon looked at her, his face tense. "We're not ready for this," he said. "I don't have a job, and your parents..." He stopped, laughing bitterly. "They'd rather see me gone than let this ruin their name." Isabella nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know. That's why we need to think fast." "Isabella," Leon said, his voice softer as he stepped closer to her. "The only way to keep you safe might be to give the baby up. It's the only choice." "No," Isabella said, shaking her head. "I can't. This is our baby." Leon reached out, touching her hand lightly. "I know, but right now it's not about what we want. It's about staying safe." The park, once full of happy memories, now felt strange and full of fear. Isabella held onto her dress, trying to hide how much she was hurting. For months, she had tried to keep her secret hidden, wearing big sweaters and baggy clothes. She had been careful, but she knew it was only a matter of time before people would start asking questions. One day, when she was walking down the stairs, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her stomach. She grabbed the railing and gasped for breath. Her mother was in the other room, and she heard Isabella's breathing. Margarita turned and walked toward her, her eyes narrowing. "Isabella, are you okay?" Margarita asked, her voice full of suspicion. Isabella tried to hide the pain. "Yes, Mom," she said, but another wave of pain hit her, and she cried out. Margarita rushed to her, grabbing her arms. "What's going on?" she whispered. Isabella didn't answer. Her mother's eyes filled with understanding, and her shock quickly turned to anger. "Ricardo," she shouted. Ricardo, Isabella's father, appeared at the door. His eyes looked from Margarita to Isabella. His anger grew. "What have you done?" he growled. "You've ruined everything." Isabella felt the room close in on her as she sank to the floor. Another sharp pain made her gasp. Margarita looked worried, but quickly covered it up. "Get her to the hospital," she ordered. At the hospital, Isabella's head throbbed as she woke up. Her father was standing over her, his voice cold and angry. "How long?" he demanded. Isabella could barely speak. "I'm sorry, Father," she whispered. Ricardo's eyes burned with fury. "You've embarrassed this family. You've ruined everything we've worked for." Margarita, standing beside him, asked, "Who is the father?" Before Isabella could answer, the door opened. Leon stepped in, his face full of worry. Isabella and Leon exchanged a look before her father shouted, You did this." Ricardo grabbed Leon by the collar and slammed him into the wall. "You ruined everything," Ricardo yelled. Leon winced but didn't fight back. "I came to see if she's okay," he said, his voice shaking. "I care about her." Ricardo laughed bitterly. "You think you can talk about caring after ruining everything? You know what this will cost us." He hit Leon in the stomach, and Leon gasped. Isabella cried out, "Stop, Dad. Please don't hurt him. It's my fault, not his." Ricardo ignored her and hit Leon again. "Look at what you've done," he shouted. Margarita stepped forward. "Ricardo, stop." Ricardo pushed Leon down to the floor. "This is all your fault," he said to Isabella. "I had plans for you. You were supposed to marry someone who could help the family." Isabella crawled to her father, crying, "Please don't hurt him. It's my fault." Ricardo looked at her, his expression cold and controlled. "Fine," he said, "but if you ever see him again, I will end him." Leon's face went pale, and he nodded, leaving without another word. He glanced at Isabella once before walking out the door. The room grew silent, and Margarita touched Ricardo's arm, but he shrugged her off. "We'll fix this," he said. Later, Ricardo spoke to the doctor in a low voice. "This situation must stay private. When the time comes, tell her the baby didn't survive." The doctor nodded, and Ricardo handed him an envelope. "Make sure no one hears about this," Ricardo added. As Ricardo and Margarita left, Leon sat in his room, feeling guilty. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Isabella's face, full of tears. He couldn't bring himself to face her. He was trapped in guilt and sadness. Then one day, Ricardo came to see him. He told Leon that when Isabella had the baby, he needed to make sure it was taken away. He said that was the only way to keep her safe. Leon felt the weight of it all. "But that's our baby," he said. Ricardo smirked. "If you love her, you'll do this. If you don't, her life will be ruined." Leon felt trapped. Ricardo handed him a paper, and Leon realized that if he didn't do what Ricardo said, his own father would lose their home. "You will do as I say," Ricardo said. "And when the baby is born, you will tell Isabella it didn't survive." Leon didn't know what to do. His heart was torn between love and fear. Ricardo's lips curled into a smug smile. He thought to himself, "This is for her own good. And if you do something wrong, I will make sure to take everything you love away." The door opened, and Margarita stood in the hallway. Her face was pale and worried. She looked at Leon with eyes full of something that might have been pity, but she didn't say anything. Ricardo walked past her, leaving a heavy silence in the air. Leon stood still, feeling the weight of what he had agreed to do. The door closed, and he was left alone again. The dim light in the room made long shadows that seemed to make fun of him. Time passed, and the days seemed to squeeze him tighter. Finally, the day came when Isabella was going to have her baby. The morning was gray, like the sky was crying with all the secrets no one wanted to say. The house was busy, with servants running around quietly, trying not to make a noise. Isabella's room was dark, only lit by a small lamp that made a warm glow on the bed where she lay. Sweat covered her face as she held onto the bedpost with her shaking hands. Each wave of pain was a reminder of the life she had carried in secret, loving her baby so much. Her mother, Margarita, sat nearby, looking away with her lips pressed tightly together. The room was filled with a silence that seemed to stretch forever. Another wave of pain hit Isabella, and she cried out in agony. The midwife, an older woman who had helped many others, worked quickly. She wiped Isabella's forehead and whispered comforting words, but they didn't help much. "It won't be long now," the midwife said. Isabella just nodded, too weak to say anything else. She tried to breathe through the pain, but each breath felt harder. Outside, Ricardo paced back and forth, his footsteps echoing in the hallway. A young doctor stood beside him, holding a clipboard in his hands. Ricardo spoke quietly but firmly. "Remember what we talked about. After it's done, you tell her nothing. No one is to know." The doctor nodded nervously. Back in the room, Isabella's cries grew louder as the pain took over. The midwife's voice, once calm, was now urging her with more force. "Just one more push, Isabella. You can do it." Finally, Isabella screamed one last time, and her body gave out from the pain. Darkness washed over her, and everything around her seemed far away. The midwife caught her as she slumped back, unconscious, and the doctor exchanged a look with Ricardo. Ricardo nodded. There was no kindness in his eyes, just coldness. The room went silent except for the soft cries of not one, but two babies. The midwife's eyes went wide in shock. She hadn't expected twins. The doctor quickly picked up the babies and moved away from the bed. Ricardo followed him out of the room, his face blank, like nothing had happened. Margarita looked at her daughter's pale, still face, unsure of what to do or say. The silence between them was heavy, and all she could do was wait. When Isabella woke up, the first thing she felt was pain. Her body ached, and she slowly opened her eyes, the room blurry. She remembered the birth, the pain, the crying, and then silence. She tried to sit up but felt too weak. A nurse came to her side, looking sad. Then Ricardo walked in, his presence colder than before. He stood at the foot of the bed. "Where are my babies?" Isabella whispered, her voice weak and full of worry. Ricardo's face didn't change as he spoke. "They didn't survive," he said, his words sharp and final. Isabella stared at him in disbelief, her heart breaking. "No, that's not true. I heard them cry. I know I did," she said, tears starting to fall. Ricardo looked at her with cold eyes. "You need to rest. It's over now. Accept it." Isabella couldn't hold it in anymore. She cried, turning her face away from him. Her heart was broken all over again. Outside, it was cold, and Leon stood, holding the twins in his arms. Their tiny faces looked so peaceful, unaware of the sadness in the world. He looked at the note in his hand, the ink blurred because his hands were shaking. "Their parents have passed. Please take care of them," it read. He knelt down and carefully placed the babies on the steps of an old church. Then he knocked on the door and left, disappearing into the night, leaving behind a feeling of guilt. Leon walked back to the hospital, his heart heavy with the choices he had made. When he reached Isabella's room, the sight of her lying so still made his chest tighten. She looked empty, like all the life had been drained from her. He whispered, "This is your fault." Isabella's eyes filled with pain, and she whispered back, "If you hadn't been so careless, none of this would have happened." Leon turned away, his heart full of anger, and walked out of the room, leaving her crying behind him. Ricardo was waiting for him in the hallway. He handed Leon an envelope. Inside was a payment, a way to make sure Leon would leave and never come back. Ricardo said, "You won't return?" Leon nodded, the weight of his decision settling deep inside him. Years passed, and the sadness of the past didn't go away. Isabella grew older, now in her 30s, but the pain of losing her babies never stopped. She walked through her family's mansion with no joy, her steps echoing on the cold marble floors. Her parents, Ricardo and Margarita, watched her, hoping she would marry and make powerful alliances for the family. But Isabella refused. She turned away every suitor. Her mother, Margarita, had tried many times to get her to move on, but Isabella would never listen. The loss of her children had made her heart cold. Meanwhile, in a small town far from the mansion, two boys grew up at St. Matthew's Orphanage. Lucas, the older one, was great at soccer. He could move through defenders like they weren't even there. His younger brother, Gabriel, was smarter than anyone could imagine. He loved reading and studying, solving hard problems that most adults couldn't understand. But no matter how good they were, both of them felt like something was missing. They often wondered about their real mother. "Do you think she's out there?" Gabriel would ask. Ethan would always answer with certainty, "I know she is." It wasn't because he knew for sure, but because he hoped with all his heart that they hadn't been abandoned. One day, the boys became famous in their town for their talents. Reporters began to take an interest in them. They learned about their mysterious past and the note that had been left at the church steps. Isabella was watching TV when she saw the report. Her heart stopped when she saw their faces. Their eyes, they were the same as Leon's. She whispered to herself, "They're alive." The next day, a nurse came to her door. "I was there the day you gave birth," the nurse said, her voice shaking. "I kept a secret for so long, but you need to know the truth. Your babies didn't die. Your father had them taken away." Isabella could hardly believe what she was hearing. Her children were alive. The truth flooded her heart, and her anger grew. She stood up, determined to find them. She stormed into the study where her parents were, her voice full of rage. "You lied to me for 12 years. You let me believe my children were dead while you took them away." Ricardo tried to explain, but Isabella wouldn't listen. She screamed, "You destroyed me for your own pride." Ricardo said it was all for the good of the family, but Isabella couldn't understand how they could be so cold. Her mother, Margarita, just looked away, silent and guilty. Isabella felt dizzy as she realized that she had been alone in her sadness, tricked and hurt. The feeling was like a huge wave crashing over her. She straightened up, pushed away the pain, and turned it into a strong decision. "I'm leaving," she said with a steady, cold voice. "I'm going to find my children." Ricardo, her father, looked angry. "If you walk out that door, don't come back," he warned. Isabella stopped and took one last look at her parents, the people who had caused her so much pain. "I won't need to," she said, then turned and walked out. The sound of her footsteps faded as she walked down the hall, and for the first time in many years, hope began to fill her heart. Isabella had made up her mind. She was going to find Ethan and Gabriel, her sons, and she would change the story that started with hurt and loss. The old stone church stood quietly under big oak trees, their branches moving in the breeze. The afternoon sunlight made shadows on the ground. Isabella's heart raced as she got closer. The car slowed and stopped in front of the church gates. She took a deep breath and gripped the seat tightly, her hands turning white. The nurse next to her, looking nervous, put a hand on Isabella's arm. "This is it," the nurse whispered. Isabella nodded, feeling too emotional to speak. She had been sad for 12 long years, and now, here she was, ready to find her children. She stepped out of the car into the cold, sharp air of autumn. The churchyard was full of children's laughter. Isabella looked around, her heart pounding. Then, she saw them. 2 boys were playing. One was running after a ball, and the other sat on the ground, watching closely. Isabella's heart skipped a beat when she saw Lucas, tall and quick, running with grace. And Gabriel, quieter but thoughtful, looked up and saw her. Their eyes met. It was like time stopped. She put a hand to her chest, her heart racing. "They," she whispered, and then louder, "Lucas, Gabriel." The children around them stopped playing, looking at the stranger standing at the gate. Ethan and Gabriel stopped too, confused. They stared at her, unsure, but something in their faces changed, like they recognized her, but didn't quite know how. Isabella dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. She reached out to them, hoping her love could pull them closer. The boys looked at each other, and then Ethan stepped forward. His face was full of confusion and something else, a feeling like forgotten memories. Who are you?" Gabriel asked, his voice soft and unsure. Ethan spoke next, his voice shaking with excitement. "It's her," he said in awe, then turned to Gabriel and said, "It's our mother." The boys ran toward her, their little legs moving fast. Isabella opened her arms, her body shaking with sobs as they hugged her tightly. It was like they had never been apart. She buried her face in their hair, smelling the sunshine and grass, feeling like everything was right again. "My sweet boys," she whispered, tracing their faces with her fingers. "I missed you so much. I'm so sorry." Ethan held her tightly, crying on her shoulder. Gabriel wrapped his arms around her waist, his face pressed against her side. Sister Catherine, who had been watching from the church, stood quietly, tears in her eyes. She had prayed for this moment. Around them, the world went on, but in that moment everything felt right. News of Isabella's reunion with her sons spread quickly. People from all over heard about the story of the mother who had lost her children and found them again. Journalists and news stations talked about it. It made everyone feel both sad and hopeful. Isabella, now filled with strength, decided to take action. She sued the hospital and her parents for what they had done. The case became very important, and reporters were waiting for every part of it. Meanwhile, far away in a rundown apartment, Leon sat with a bottle of whiskey. He was shocked when he saw the news on the TV. The reporter talked about Isabella's search and how she had found Ethan and Gabriel. Leon's hand shook as he watched, realizing that his boys were still alive. The guilt he had carried for so long was mixed with hope. He couldn't believe it. The next day, Isabella stood in court with Ethan and Gabriel. Ricardo and Margarita, her parents, sat nearby, looking ashamed. Leon was in the crowd, watching from far away. He felt a deep longing, but knew he could never fix the things he had done. When the judge made the decision, Isabella won. The hospital and everyone involved had to pay for what they did, and Ricardo's power was broken. But more than that, Isabella had won back what was hers. Not just her son's, but also her voice, her story, and the future she had once lost. As she looked at her sons, who trusted her and loved her, she felt whole for the first time in years. Months later, their house was different. It was full of light and warmth. There was laughter and happiness where there had once been silence and sadness. Isabella stood in the kitchen, smelling the fresh bread she had baked for breakfast. She was so grateful for this time with her boys. They talked about school and plans for the weekend, the small things that made every day special. But one day, while she was in the kitchen, there was a knock at the door. Gabriel looked up from his book and asked, "Mom, do you want me to get that?" Isabella smiled and said, "No, sweetheart, I'll go." As she walked to the door, she felt a bit of fear from the past. When she opened it, the man standing there was older, looking sad. It was Leon. "I didn't know if you'd see me," he said quietly. Isabella felt a mix of emotions, anger, hurt, and something softer. But she took a deep breath and said firmly, "I appreciate your apology, but I've rebuilt my life. We don't need the past anymore." Leon looked down, sad, but he understood. "I'm glad they have you," he said softly before turning and walking away. Isabella closed the door and returned to the kitchen where her sons were. When Ethan asked who it was, she answered, "No one important." It was true. The past no longer controlled their lives. They were free to enjoy the future. As the years passed, Isabella used the money her parents had once used to hurt others to build a better future. She helped children in need, built schools, and supported communities. Ethan and Gabriel grew taller and more confident, proud of their mother. Gabriel did well in school, and Ethan became a star soccer player. But what mattered most was how they cared for each other. One evening, after a community event, Isabella sat with her boys outside, feeling peaceful. Gabriel asked, "Do you ever wonder what it would have been like if things had been different?" Isabella looked at them, her heart full. "I used to," she said softly, "but now I'm just grateful for what we have." Ethan smiled. "I'm glad you found us, Mom." Isabella smiled back, feeling everything she had fought for come full circle. "You found me too," she said, knowing their journey was complete. Isabella's story spread beyond their town, inspiring others. People from all walks of life reached out, moved by her courage and love. Even Leon, from far away, saw the happy life she had created with her sons. And though he could never change the past, he knew that Isabella and her boys had found their way back to each other. As the boys grew into young men, they continued to honor their mother's courage. They excelled in everything they did, but more than that, they showed love and care for others. One day, as they celebrated Gabriel's acceptance into a university, Isabella stood back, watching them laugh together. The sun was setting, casting everything in a golden light. She felt peaceful, knowing that the darkness from the past had been replaced with love, resilience, and hope. If you enjoyed this story and would like to see more content like it, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel. By subscribing, you'll stay updated on all our latest, inspiring, and heartwarming stories, and have the opportunity to engage with our growing community. Additionally, I would love to hear your thoughts and feedback in the comment section below. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to sharing more captivating narratives with you.